My daughter came home sobbing. Grandpa dragged me away and said, "Trash ruins the photo." She was limping. I went to the estate and showed them who really owned it. "Get out," I smiled, as they lost it all. "Hey Reddit, my name is Claire Morgan. I'm 36 years old, and the phone call I received from my 16-year-old daughter changed the way I saw my family forever." She was sobbing. "Mom, what happened?" She took a shaky breath. "Grandpa dragged me away from the family photo." My heart stopped. "Why?" she whispered. "He said trash ruins the photo." I felt sick. Then I noticed something. "Emma, why are you limping?" She went quiet. That was when I grabbed my keys. I drove straight to my parents' estate. I didn't know it yet, but that visit would uncover a secret my father had been hiding for years. Because the property everyone thought belonged to him wasn't actually his. I grew up in a wealthy family. My father, Richard, owned a successful construction company, and my mother managed several family properties. They cared deeply about appearances. Everything had to look perfect. The right clothes, the right schools, the right photographs. My daughter Emma was different. She loved drawing, wore sneakers everywhere, and didn't care about expensive clothes. My father constantly criticized her. "Why can't she dress properly? Can't you make her look more presentable?" I always defended her, but I never thought he'd physically humiliate her. The incident happened during my mother's birthday celebration. Everyone had gathered at the family estate. After dinner, Dad called everyone outside for a family photograph. Emma stood beside me in a simple black dress and white sneakers. My father looked at the group. Then he pointed at her. "You move." Emma looked confused. "Grandpa, you don't belong in the picture." I stepped forward. "Dad, what are you doing?" He lowered his voice. "She doesn't fit." Emma's eyes filled with tears. I moved closer to her. "If she's not in the picture, I'm not in it either." Dad became angry. "Don't make a scene." Then he grabbed Emma's arm. She pulled away. "Grandpa, you're hurting me." I stepped forward. "Let her go." He dragged her several feet away from the group. Then he said the words that I would never forget. "Trash ruins the photo." Emma froze. So did I. The photographer continued standing there awkwardly. I grabbed my daughter's hand. "We're leaving." Dad called after me. "Claire, don't be dramatic." I didn't answer. When we got home, Emma went straight to her room. Later, she opened the door. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "Why does Grandpa hate me?" My heart broke. "He doesn't hate you. He called me trash." I hugged her. She whispered, "Maybe I don't belong with them." I immediately shook my head. "You belong wherever you are loved." She started crying. Then I noticed her ankle again. It was swollen. That's when my anger disappeared, and something colder took its place. I wasn't gonna let this go. The next morning, I called my mother. "What happened yesterday?" She sighed. "Your father got carried away. He hurt Emma. He didn't mean to. He called her trash." Mom became quiet. Then she said, "You know how your father is about appearances." I couldn't believe it. That isn't an excuse. "Claire, don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I hung up, but something about the conversation stayed with me. My father had always cared about controlling the family image. And suddenly, I remembered something from my grandfather's estate. Years ago, before he died, he'd created a family trust. I knew my name was somewhere in it. I'd never cared about the money. My father handled everything. I trusted him. Maybe I shouldn't have. That afternoon, I contacted an attorney. I asked her to review the old trust documents. She searched the records. Then she went quiet. "Claire, you're listed as the primary beneficiary." "Of what?" "The family estate." I sat down. "What does that mean?" She explained that my grandfather had placed the estate, several investment accounts, and ownership interests in a trust. My father had been appointed to manage them temporarily. But I thought Dad owned the estate. He doesn't appear to. My stomach tightened. How long was he supposed to manage it? "Until you reached 30. I stared at the wall. I was 36. Then she said, "There's more." "What?" "It appears your father may have continued representing himself as the owner even after control was supposed to transfer." I felt my hands go cold. "Can he do that?" "Not if these documents are accurate." My attorney sent me copies of everything. I read them twice. My grandfather had specifically named me. The estate, the land, the investments, they were all connected to the trust. And there was a clause allowing me to demand a complete accounting. I called my attorney. "What happens if I enforce this?" "Your father could lose control of the estate." I looked at the documents. "And the company?" "That depends on the ownership records." Before I could say anything else, my phone rang. "Mom," I answered. "Claire, your father wants to see you." "Why?" "He wants to talk about Emma." I looked at the papers on my table. "Fine." Mom hesitated. "Please don't come angry." I looked toward Emma's room. "I won't." Then I added, "But I'm not coming alone." I hung up. The next morning, I drove toward the estate. My father still believed it was his property. He had no idea I had the trust documents. He had no idea the control he'd held for years was about to be challenged. And he certainly didn't know that the daughter he had always treated as an outsider was the person his own father had chosen to inherit everything. My father thought he had humiliated my daughter and sent us away like unwanted guests. He had no idea that the person he had underestimated was the one who could legally take control of everything he called his own. And when I walked through those estate gates the next morning, I wasn't there to argue with my father. I was there to show him exactly who really owned the property. I drove through the gates of my parents' estate the next morning, with the trust documents sitting on the passenger seat. For years, I'd driven through those gates as my father's daughter. That morning, I arrived as the legal beneficiary of the property. I parked and walked toward the front door. My father was waiting. "So you came." I looked at him. "I'm here to talk about Emma." He crossed his arms. "Your daughter needs to learn how to behave." I almost laughed. She was dragged away from a photograph. She was ruining the picture. I stared at him. "You called your granddaughter trash." He shrugged. "You're being too sensitive." That was when I realized he still didn't understand. I placed the trust documents on the table. "No, Dad, you're about to learn what being careless with people can cost you." He looked at the papers. "What is this?" "Grandpa's trust." His expression changed. Mom came into the room. "What are you doing?" I pointed to the documents. "Apparently, you both forgot to read them." Dad picked up the first page. He read silently. Then another. His face slowly lost its color. "This can't be right." My attorney confirmed it. He shook his head. "I've managed this estate for years." "Because Grandpa appointed you as trustee." "Exactly. Temporarily." He looked at me. I continued. "Control was supposed to transfer to me when I turned 30. Mom sat down. "Claire," I looked at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She didn't answer. Dad finally said, "Your grandfather didn't want you involved until you were older. 6 years ago, I became old enough." Silence. "Why didn't you transfer control?" Dad looked away. That was my answer. My attorney arrived shortly afterward. She explained everything carefully. The trust was legitimate. The property belonged to the trust. I was the beneficiary. My father had authority to manage it, but he couldn't treat the assets as his personal property. And now that I had formally demanded control and an accounting, he had to provide the records. Dad became angry. "You can't just walk in here and take everything." I shook my head. "I'm not taking anything." I pointed toward the house. "I'm claiming what Grandpa left me." He stood up. "This family belongs here." I looked around. "So does Emma." He went silent. Then I said, "She will never be called trash in this house again." The accounting revealed more than we expected. My father had used family investment accounts to pay for renovations, vacations, and several personal expenses. Some were legitimate trustee expenses, others weren't. My attorney identified several transactions that required explanation. Dad insisted there had been misunderstandings, but the records didn't lie. He had spent years treating the estate as if it were his personal bank account. Now he had to answer for it. My mother started crying. "We could lose everything." I looked at her. "You could lose control of something that was never yours." She lowered her head. That distinction mattered. A week later, my father moved out of the estate. For the first time, he didn't have the final say. I didn't celebrate. I didn't scream. I simply stood in the doorway as he carried his last box to his car. He stopped beside me. "You really did this." I shook my head. "Grandpa did this when he created the trust. You could have left things alone." I looked at him. "I did leave things alone. For years. You were the one who pushed me to look closer." He had nothing to say. Then he drove away. My mother stayed for a little longer. Eventually, she apologized to Emma. She sat across from my daughter and said, "What your grandfather did was wrong." Emma looked at her. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" Mom began crying. "Because we were afraid of him." Emma nodded, then quietly said, "I was afraid too." That sentence broke my mother's heart. She hugged Emma. This time, Emma accepted the hug. But things weren't magically fixed. They couldn't be. Trust doesn't return simply because someone says sorry. It has to be earned. I renovated part of the estate and turned it into something completely different. Not a place where appearances mattered more than people. A place where family could actually feel welcome. Emma chose the colors for her room. She turned one of the spare rooms into an art studio. I watched her paint the walls herself. One afternoon, she looked at me and smiled. "Mom, yeah? Can I invite my friends over?" I smiled. "Of course." She laughed. "Grandpa would hate that." I laughed too. "Probably." Then she hugged me. And for the first time since that terrible photograph, I saw her completely relaxed. Epilogue. I still think about that photograph sometimes. Not because I care about the picture, because I remember the moment my daughter believed she didn't belong. No child should ever be made to feel like they're an embarrassment because they don't fit someone else's idea of perfection. Emma taught me something too. I had spent years avoiding conflict with my father because I didn't want to disturb the family. But silence doesn't always protect peace. Sometimes silence protects the person causing the damage. I wish I'd confronted my father sooner, but I also learned that it isn't too late to set a boundary. Today, the estate is under my control. The family assets are properly managed. My father no longer has access to them. And the family photographs, we take them differently now. Nobody stands in the back because they don't look perfect. Nobody gets removed because their clothes aren't expensive. Everyone who belongs gets to stand in the picture, including Emma, especially Emma, because the truth is, my daughter was never the thing that ruined the photograph. The ugly thing was the way my father treated someone he was supposed to love. And when I finally stood up and showed him who really owned the estate, I didn't do it because I wanted revenge. I did it because I wanted my daughter to understand something she should have known all along. She never needed to earn her place in this family. She already belonged. And as I watched her laughing with her friends in the garden that once made her feel unwanted, I realized something else. My grandfather hadn't just left me an estate. He had left me the responsibility to decide what kind of family would live in it. And this time, I chose kindness over appearances.